Earlier this summer, we towed with the 2.7 liter Turbo Max, the long-standing 5.3 liter V8, and now we have the big dog, the 6.2 liter V8 in this very nice looking blacked out 2024 Chevy High Country Silverado. And today we're gonna see if this big old V8 can take the towing crown away from the 3.5 liter EcoBoost. Let's see what happens. Welcome back, I'm Alex, and well, despite the rather cloudy, gloomy weather, I'm very excited to have this big 6.2 liter. This is the second gen 6.2 liter, which dropped in 2019, a part of GM's EcoTech 3 engine platform, also known as the L87. And this is the most powerful V8 in the 1500 segment, pushing 420 horsepower, 460 pound-feet of torque. So she's got some power to her. Now, not only is this engine larger than the 5.3 liter V8, but it also has some stronger internals. We got a forged crankshaft, forged connecting rods, higher compression ratios, as well as a billet steel camshaft, all of which can hopefully allow this engine to perform very well and maybe, just maybe, take the towing crown. Speaking of towing, this is my blacked out 8,000 pound enclosed trailer. Maximum wind resistance, extra wide, extra tall. We use the same water weights in here at the same location, giving us the exact same tongue weights. We also tow the same 120-mile towing loop, and this gives us a really nice comparison between engine and truck when it comes to fuel economy, acceleration, pulling hills, transmission temperatures, and just generally how I feel the truck handles the same load. First up is our off-the-line acceleration test. We go 0 to 50 kilometers an hour. We put the truck in four-wheel drive and we see how fast we can get there. It's a very good example to show how the engine transfers its torque to the wheels to get a load moving. And well, to nobody's surprise, the 3.5 liter EcoBoost is currently the fastest truck at 4.9 seconds. And it'll be interesting to see if this big displacement engine with all of its naturally aspirated power can beat it. 3, 2, 1, to the floor. Bam. Take two, 3, 2, 1, to the floor. Ooh, a little wheel skip there. Not bad, not bad. Well, that EcoBoost is certainly quick. I thought maybe with the naturally aspirated torque, not having to wait for a turbo to spool up, we might be able to take it, but I guess not. Once again, very interesting. The torque figures line up perfectly with how fast a truck pulls off the line, which I guess, again, ultimately does make sense. One thing that certainly can impact acceleration, especially when towing, is a driveline. And I want to talk about this in just a little bit because there are some really interesting max towing capacities in this configuration truck with this engine, with this driveline. But as always, I think it's time we get this thing on the highway and see how she pulls. One thing I certainly do like about the 6.2 liter is when we're in town, it just feels like the throttle response, that instant torque or power is available a little bit quicker than the 3.5 liter EcoBoost. And the other thing is the sound this thing makes. It is pretty wonderful with a load behind it, something the EcoBoost just cannot compete with. But as many of you guys will point out to me, sound is not everything, and ultimately it is the performance of the engine that really matters. And speaking of which, we have our second acceleration test. We go 60 to 110 kilometers an hour to get up to our cruising highway speed. Let's see what happens. 60 to the floor. $110. Well, we were close, but not close enough to knock off the crowned 3.5 liter EcoBoost. One thing that's interesting is I find horsepower seems to play a bigger part at these speeds. And this is the first truck that sort of bucks that trend, 420 horsepower. I thought with that extra 20 horsepower, we might be able to pull that trailer just a little bit harder and quicker to 110 kilometers an hour. But that 3.5 liter EcoBoost sits comfortably at the top once again. We got our cruise control set to 110 kilometers an hour in tow haul mode. And like we always do, we're just gonna let the truck do its thing and we're gonna observe and see how it performs. And there's two things I'm gonna be keeping my eye on as we go through the Appalachian Mountains here. First of all, when we're comparing any engine to the EcoBoost, is RPM control. The EcoBoost is exceptionally good at keeping the RPMs nice and low not having to have the engine work necessarily as hard or spin as fast. Secondly is fuel economy. The EcoBoost was atrocious. We finished with 40.4 liters per 100 kilometers. I want to see if, first of all, this truck can keep the RPMs just as low as the EcoBoost and hopefully not use as much fuel. Now you might say, well, Alex, of course this engine is going to use more fuel because it's almost twice as big. And in reality, that's actually not true. The smaller displacement turbocharged engines, when pulling this very wind resistive enclosed trailer, absolutely drink fuel like it's going out of style. These naturally aspirated V8s, despite being much, much larger, tend to be actually much more fuel efficient, which is interesting. Here's our first little hill. I just like to use this as a little comparison. And well, we're at 3,500 RPM, which is actually not terrible. And I think we're gonna stay there. Very nice start of the gate here. 3,500 RPM is very acceptable on that hill. Here's our first real hill. The grade is not that steep, but it's very long. Currently, we're sitting at just under 110 at 2,800 RPM. Okay, downshift right there, 3,500 RPM. The EcoBoost sat at 3,000 RPM going up this hill, so we are revving a little bit higher, but this is very respectable. The 5.3 was revving at 4,200 RPM. Okay, so Driveline up front, no surprise, 6.2 liter engine. We got our 10L80 10-speed transmission, and then back here, dun, 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 we have 323 gears, unfortunately. Now, although it is a little bit disappointing to have 323s, not the 342s available with this engine, it is actually a little bit nice for our comparison's sake because every Ford has run with 331 gears, and then we just did the 5.3 liter, and that also had 323 gears. So in terms of comparing on our towing loop, the gearing is all within the same ballpark, meaning that any real differences in towing performance should be mostly due to the engine and the engine alone. But there is something interesting about this configuration of truck with this engine. The average truck enthusiast would probably assume that with the big boy 6.2 liter engine that you would get a far greater towing capacity than the smaller brother 5.3 liter V8. And well, you would be incorrect. This did surprise me, but hear me out. We have a crew cab, 4x4 short box, 6.2 liter 10-speed transmission with 323 gears, gives us a max towing capacity of 9,200 pounds. And if we were to outfit the same configuration of truck with only the 5.3 liter V8, we would have a max towing capacity of 9,300 pounds. Now, if you order the 6.2 liter in this configuration with the max towing package, which gives us the 342 gears, this thing can now tow a maximum of about 13,100 pounds. So, moral of the story is that driveline and gearing matters. Despite technically on paper the 5.3 being able to tow more weight than the 6.2, in the real world, this engine will run laps around that 5.3. We're about 50 kilometers into our trek here, and a couple things I want to touch on. Fuel economy. We're currently sitting at 32.7 liters per 100 kilometers, now 32.8. That is very efficient. That's actually more efficient than the 5.3 liter at this point in our test. The second thing is our transmission temp. We're currently sitting at 82 degrees, which is ice cold. That's basically exactly where the 5.3 liter was sitting. I don't know what it is with the GM 10 speeds, but they just seem to run much, much cooler than the other transmissions, especially Ford's 10-speed and GM's own 8-speed transmission. Going up our second hill here, we're about 3,500 RPM, which I'm happy with. The EcoBoost was sitting around 3,000 RPM, so a little bit lower. And there's a reason why that EcoBoost probably hangs a little bit lower in the RPM band, which I'll talk about in just a second. Well, we made it to the halfway point. So far, so good. Transmission temp is fantastic. Fuel economy, actually fantastic. And I'm very excited to get this thing on the backstretch with those bigger hills and see what she's got. So this far on our towing loop, we've seen that the 3.5 liter EcoBoost with almost half the displacement somehow is in better control of its RPMs or produces lower RPMs on those same hills. And well, there's a couple of reasons for that. First off, on paper, that EcoBoost produces 40 more pound-feet of torque, which is something, but it's not necessarily earth-shattering. I think what's more important about the torque figures is the delivery, more importantly, when that torque is delivered. This engine produces its peak torque of 460 pound-feet at 4,100 RPM, where that 3.5 liter EcoBoost produces all 500 pound-feet of its torque at only 2,500 RPM. Additionally, that 3.5 liter EcoBoost produces 90% of its torque at only 1,700 RPM. So at 1,700 RPM, the 3.5 EcoBoost is making 450 pound-feet of torque, almost identically what this engine is making at 4,100 RPM. So the EcoBoost is making its torque much quicker and much lower in the RPM band, and its peak torque is only at 2,500 RPM. So it's much more likely to want to stick closer to that RPM to get maximum engine power, where this engine makes its peak torque at 4,100 RPM. So it's much more likely to want to stick around 4,000 RPM to produce as much torque as possible to the rear wheels. The second reason, and I've talked about this before, this is a naturally aspirated engine. So when the truck demands more power to the wheels to maintain our speed of 70 miles an hour when going up a hill, this engine is going to have to downshift into its, peak torque band right around 4,000 RPM. Whereas that EcoBoost engine, being a turbocharged engine, the turbo can simply spool up and push more air into the engine. More air into the engine means what? More power, more torque to keep that load moving. And that's why turbos are so advantageous when towing. And in my opinion, those are the two main reasons why the EcoBoost does not have to rev as high as this engine right here. Well, we're on the back stretch, and this is where the bigger hills lie. I think we're gonna see more of the same. This engine probably sitting around 3,500 RPM if I had to guess. Okay, another downshift, 3,500 RPM. Yeah, I think we're gonna sit right here. Oh yeah, making the pass. What do we got here? Little Canadian Tire truck. Oh yeah. International. Doesn't surprise me, it's in the slow lane with the old max force. Just making more passes. A little bit of lumber. What do we got? Oh, another international. Well, we got our biggest hill ahead of us here. This is for all the marbles. Hopefully we don't get jammed up here. We got a little bit of traffic. All right, 105. Lost some speed there. Downshift, 3,500, 45, well, 4,000 RPM. $4,200 RPM, 4,100 RPM. Well, I thought we would stay a little bit closer to 3,500 RPM, but we had to downshift again. It is what it is. This is why we run these babies, to see what these engines got. We kind of got jammed up with traffic there. We came up to the hill under speed. We weren't at 110 to begin with, and maybe that's why we had to downshift one more gear. Who knows? It's a real world test, and well, we got to take safety as our number one consideration. So traffic, sometimes it just happens. One thing that is interesting is the 5-liter V8 from Ford is actually just about neck and neck with this 6.2 liter in terms of RPM control. With only 5 liters of displacement, it does seem to still pack pretty large punch, being able to really compete with this 6.2 liter, at least on my towing loop, which is interesting. Well, we are coming to the end of our towing loop here. Our average fuel economy is 30.8 liters per 100 kilometers, which is surprisingly much better than what I thought. Well, we made her back in one piece with this very nice looking high country, and as you guys probably saw in the video, it just felt a little bit short of that 3.5 liter EcoBoost, and well, that EcoBoost just pulls so well. Either way, it is definitely one of the top engines I have pulled on my towing loop. Tons of power, felt great behind the wheel, and it sounds very nice. So this big V8 is pretty powerful. I don't think that's gonna surprise anyone, but what may surprise people, certainly surprised me, is the fuel economy on our towing run. We averaged below 31 liters per 100 kilometers, which is about 25% better than the 3.5 liter EcoBoost. It's even more efficient than the 5 liter Coyote, which to me, I just would have never guessed. And then secondly, like I mentioned during our towing loop, is the transmission temperatures in these GM 10 speeds just seem to be cooled extremely well. Overall, if you're looking to use this engine in a towing application, I do not think you're going to be disappointed. I genuinely really actually like towing with this engine. It is going to be interesting to see how this engine fares against the new kid on the block, the 3 liter Hurricane engine. Apparently, it's pretty powerful, but for those of you who do not want a turboed engine, this thing is pretty darn good at pulling a load. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think. If you like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe, because next week we got a truck that doesn't use gas or diesel. Oh boy, that's different. And with that, enough of me. We'll see you in the next frickin' video.